Hey guys, so we're no strangers to Turenne. We when we watched Kings and Generals' 30 Years War series, we were introduced to Turenne. And in that series, while he did kind of play, how do you say, he was under Conde. Conde was kind of the main guy of the French side. Um, kind of conducting the moves and whatnot. But Turenne was a very interesting person, is that a lot of Conde's, you know, um, successes, were definitely in big part to Turenne's aid and his competence in the battlefield. Like in that climactic battle against Mercy, in which, Turenne's flank managed to break through the Austrian line and help secure a decisive victory. So, point is, we were introduced to him, and I took note of his competence, and I often found myself agreeing more with Turenne. Like, Conde's plans were, let us charge, let us attack, and let us just overcome the enemy through pure, basically strong, brute strength, right? Like, the French fury, as Kings and Generals put it. Turenne, however, was the one coming up with like plans like, oh, let us, disrupt their supply lines and whatnot. So they really struck me as polar opposites. One being way more aggressive and forward, and Turenne, more collected, calm, and methodical. At least in that series is how they were portrayed. I did read a lot of the comments, and things obviously changed as the two got older, and that was just in the 30 Years War. And to see what has changed, I'm looking at this video from HistoryMarche called The Master of Maneuver Warfare Turenne. So this is many years after the 30 Years War, so it'll be really interesting to see what Turenne's been up to, see how he's evolved, and hopefully get a better look at him as an individual. Like I said, in the 30 Years War series, he was under Conde. At least it came across like Conde was the main guy for the French side, and he overruled any opposition to his plans. So he was in control. But I'm hoping to see Turenne and what he's more capable of without like being supervised in that sense. And the thing is, I've heard a lot of good things about Turenne. A lot of people were hyping him up, like, oh my gosh, he's a guy who Napoleon looked up to, and he was just great. He's probably the greatest French commander, right up there with Napoleon. So there's definitely a lot of hype. And I'm hoping this isn't an Antiochus III situation where there's so much hype and no payoff. Because again, like as you all know, I'm very disappointed in Antiochus III. That guy disappointed me greatly. But, so definitely with all this hype, I'm expecting greatness. I'm expecting genius. I'm expecting maneuvers that are so great that my head will explode, And with that anticipation, with that build up, with all that hype, I'm very excited to get to the video. So, if you want to watch the original video by HistoryMarche, the link to this video is down in the description down below. It is the first link you will find. And if you enjoy my content and want to help me out, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helped my small but humble channel grow, and I would appreciate it very much. Now, with that said, without any further ado, let's get to it, right, friends? Let us watch The Master of Maneuver Warfare, Turenne, Campaign of 1674, by HistoryMarche.
It is late autumn 1674, and in the great halls of the Holy Roman Empire, the high commands of the Emperor Leopold I and Elector Frederick William of Brandenburg have made a fateful decision. Following the despoliation of the Palatinate by the forces of the French King Louis XIV, and with French gains in the war against the Dutch Republic increasing on the victory of the Great Khan at Senef the previous August, the Imperial Alliance has decided that France itself will be subject to invasion, and the war taken to the very soil of the Sun King. To this end,
I've heard about Louis the Sun King. Mainly, I've heard nothing but good things about his reign. Everyone, what little I've heard basically and read is that he was a great king, and overall was cited very highly. He also has a really cool nickname. So that's interesting. And I like how we've dropped off with France and Austria fighting again. Dang. I'm sure he'll explain the why they're fighting. HistoryMarche always does that, but it's funny to me. I'm like, after the 30 Years' War, I'm surprised the Holy Roman Empire wants to fight anybody, but again, maybe this is a situation where they couldn't avoid it. But I was amazed after that series. I'm like, dang, how does Germany have any manpower left? You know? So yeah, I'm sorry. Let's get back to the video.
a huge army under Alexander de Bournonville, Count of Hénin-Litat, moves like a juggernaut and occupies the neutral city of Strasbourg, using it as a bridgehead to cross the Rhine and move into French territory. To oppose this force, Louis can only call on his stalwart, Henri de la Tour d'Auvergne, known to all simply as Turenne, and a relatively paltry 30,000 French soldiers. Turenne's difficult cause is made exponentially more acute by the news that a second Brandenburger army under the Grand Elector himself is en route to link up with Bournonville, a development that would render almost any set-piece battle between the two sides a foregone conclusion. With the Emperor's company still pouring over the Rhine, Turenne moves out to save France from...
Okay, so I may have missed if he mentioned the Austrian numerical advantage, but according to the figures, obviously Alexander's is the bigger army, and now there's another army coming to reinforce that, which means that Turenne's gonna have to not only face against numerical superiority, but I'm assuming he's gonna have to take them out, divide and conquer, like very much Napoleon-esque. Take on one army and then move on to the other. I'm guessing. I'm just speculating right now. I'm not sure. But that feels like, yeah, them linking up is the worst thing that can happen to him.
what is almost certain to be a ruinous onslaught. The French state of Louis XIV is a wonder of the early modern age. Not only does it lead Europe in science, art, and philosophy, the king heads the first regular army in a millennium that approaches those of the ancient Caesars in size and capability. While the medieval armies of the French kings had numbered barely over 10,000 men during peacetime, and increased by 1 or 2-fold by the hiring of mercenaries or the drafting of high nobility and their retainers, Louis had built on the considerable advancements of his namesake father, and now with his conflict against the Dutch and the Empire raging all around his borders, his army numbers close to 300,000 men.
Holy crap. Okay, we're definitely reaching the, yeah, there's a funny thing. Like, people joke around the medieval era, like, oh, the typical medieval army is like 500 guys. You know, there's a lot of memes with the medieval era that armies were smaller. And it is true to a degree, you know. We think of, like, the Romans who had, like 90,000 men, and then, like, by comparison, the medieval era was like a few thousand in certain parts of it. But yeah, I think we're finally reaching, like, the more modern-esque, where armies went back to being hundreds of thousands. So holy crap, that is amazing. Really utilizing the manpower of France, because I believe France, after Russia, might have the largest manpower reserves in Europe. I remember HistoryMarche stating that. I know that was like around the Napoleonic era, where he said France was second only to Russia in manpower, but still, I think the point still stands in the sense that, yeah, definitely would look at that, holy crap.
An astronomical force. Yet only a fraction of these are available to Turenne in the declining months of 1674. The main French field army is to the north with Conde, mopping up in the aftermath of Senef, and the rest are occupied with operations against the still dangerous Spanish in the shadow of the Pyrenees to the south. Turenne looks at his situation while Bournonville musters to reduce the Rhineland, and he realizes that to sit in a defensive posture is to invite his already fragile force to melt away due to desertion and disease over the debilitating winter. The Frenchman thus decides that élan will be the order of the day, and he sets out to confront his enemies and prevent their union.
Very Napoleon-esque, or rather very Turenne-esque, because he came before Napoleon, but you know what I mean. We saw this a lot, like with Napoleon. When an enemy was marching, he would rush and take them on separately, divide and conquer. Don't let them take the initiative, you take the initiative. So, happy to be seeing that in action again.
With Bournonville's main force at Ansheim, Turenne arrives at Molsheim on the 3rd of October, having marched his men through the night. This position has the effect of disrupting Bournonville's contact with his main headquarters at Strasbourg, but Turenne is not finished yet. The next day, the 4th of October, he marches out from Molsheim to confront the Imperials. Bournonville is confident enough in his superiority to march and meet the French, but he deploys in a defensive posture, reasonably gauging that the cold and precipitous conditions will favor the stationary host. When Turenne surveys the imperial host, he notes that its center is formed around the village of Ansheim itself, with woods on both the right and left flanks. The woods to Bournonville's right are far enough away by the river Ile to be of little disturbance, but the woods on the imperial left will be vital if Turenne is to break the enemy's center and take control of the village. As such, he orders his lines to focus on an attack there at the outset. Both armies deploy in the front and reserve lines, with cavalry on the wings. The influence of the great Swedish king, General Gustavus Adolphus, is still seen 4 decades on from his death in Turenne's deployment of infantry support units placed between his cavalry squadrons. Interestingly, the French army also contains a British contingent, 4 regiments in total, who were a holdover from the earlier official English involvement in the war.
Wow, that's interesting.
Though it is a secret, Charles II has promised Louis of France that he will eventually return England to the Catholic fold when the time is correct. In the meantime, Louis will give him much-needed funding in return for his clandestine troops. For the initial attack on the wood, Turenne elects to utilize infantry and a dragoon unit to be sent forth to the trees. 8 battalions of foot, plus the mounted detachment. They move quickly toward the thicket, the artillery duel between the 8 French artillery pieces in their front line against the Imperial guns, churning up clots of earth amidst the companies and filling the air with a quaking roar. There is no movement from the woods. The French soldiers hurrying toward the tree line begin to dream that Bournonville has been overwhelmed by Turenne's sudden appearance after the forced march and somehow overlooked the strategic point. They come within the last 100 yards and are allowed one more moment of exquisite optimism before a sharp snap emits from the woods.
Oh snap, holy crap. Okay, that's a great move there. Yeah, he did not overlook the woods. And he just mentioned that the woods apparently are going to play a part in Turenne's overall plan. So yeah, now that's kind of at least slowed things down because now he has to actually take the woods by force. Alright, good on Austria for that.
The hidden imperial force opens up and cuts down the front line of French marauders. Bournonville has indeed recognized the importance of the woods, and so they have been solidly reinforced with 8 guns, as well as half a dozen battalions of infantry, who are now firing on the floundering Frenchmen. The dragoons attempt to charge, but it comes to naught save death and injury, and even though the French officers quickly bring their men to order and fire in volleys, the hidden enemy within the woods has an open target on Turenne's men in the open. The French infantry and the dragoons try again, but the woods are too well defended. Withdrawal is the only option, save suicidal frontal attack. It is a dispiriting setback, but Turenne knows that he must have the woods if he is to have the battle, and so he draws companies from the reserve. 2 of the regiments from the reinforcements are of the British Brigade, and they number amongst their officers one John Churchill, the future Duke of Marlborough, and a man pivotal to British and European history. In spite of Churchill's presence amidst his compatriots, the second operation to seize the woods is no more successful than the first, and the 2 sides settle into a grim back and forth of musket and small artillery fire. The October cold has not abated with the onset of afternoon, and the rain has continued to fall, hampering the ability of both sides to bring their main guns to bear in the contest. Turenne ratchets up the pressure on the units in the woods by sending a cavalry detachment around to attempt an envelopment from the far side of the tree line. But to the commander Vorbrum's dismay, they discover that Bournonville has placed no fewer than 8 battalions behind.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, Bournonville's on top of this. Yeah, good on him for recognizing the importance of the woods. Though this is really bad for Turenne because, again, he needs those woods. So the delay of having to try to take them, if he is able to, is... yeah, that creates a lot of complications. Holy crap.
The main force in reserve, and these easily deal with the onrushing cavalrymen, stinging musket volleys cutting riders down from every direction. Bournonville himself, watching the proceedings with satisfaction, decides that the moment has come for action, and with his French opponent stretched thin on his lines, and with companies out of position, he orders an advance. The attack is quick and strong enough that the Imperial Mounted Right quickly push back and scatter their opposite numbers on the French side. But though outnumbered, the French centre and left wing reserve hold, and the soft ground soon turns to morass for the Imperial infantry and their rear units. They cannot bring their advantage to bear, and the French guns now have the advantage of range. They cut deep holes in the Imperial lines, and when the offensive has juddered to a certain halt, a counterattack begins. The French left having regrouped, and the Imperial lines are pushed back to their initial positions. Simultaneously, the focus on the main action has taken Imperial attention from the woods, and the combined French and British forces are at last able to cut through the defenses.
Alright, this is a good... yeah, again, these woods I'm keeping note of because, again, he's mentioning how this is so pivotal to Turenne's overall plan. I wonder how he's going to use them, though. That's the part that gets me. But at least he's finally making headway on taking them.
And take the position. The French advance across the entire field, but they are finding the same problems of terrain the Imperials suffered during their offensive. The French guns cannot be brought forward, and the conditions are worsening as the light starts to fade. Vauban regulates his company and squadrons, and then with a flourish of trumpets that sounds flattened in falling mist, a major charge is mounted over the sodden ground toward Arnsheim itself.
Yeah, fighting in the rain is... It goes to show, like, we've seen rain fights before and just how much the rain can mess up, like, movement and plans. Especially, like, he's mentioned, like, the mud, which is definitely making people slower, and obviously the ground of not being able to fully bring their guns, so... Definitely, I think that with a more defensive line that the Imperials have, that definitely with these conditions might be better. Because again, when they went on the offensive, they were pushed back. But now that the French, are now trying to go on the offensive, they're now having the exact same struggle, so now it's like reversed. And it seems like Turenne is on a time limit, in a sense, because the Imperials are going to be reinforced by another army. So Turenne can't have that, so he doesn't have the luxury of time on his side, you get me? Again, that's kind of like, it reminds me a lot of when we were watching the Napoleon series, and the constant, you know, Napoleon needing to gain decisive victories quick, so that these enemies don't reinforce or rally together. So yeah, Turenne doesn't seem like he has the luxury of delaying the battle for another day or stuff, you know?
Bournonville's units steel themselves, and the officers and commanders beat men into line as the riders encroach out of the gloom. Pistol and musket flash like lightning strikes out of the grey, and the sabres and bayonets are deployed in a struggle that results in terrible wounds. Grenadiers to the fore in both sides lock weapons, but the Imperial guns are now in the advantage, and the French are forced back when the Imperials hold their line. The French guns reach a position of range, and they begin to bombard the enemy line while the dusk finally settles in for the night. Bournonville has seen enough, and he begins an organized withdrawal. Turenne, eventually seeing any gains will have to go unpursued in the dark, and that more attacks will only lead to further losses, begins to do the same.
Oh.
Only a holding force of French cavalry is left on the field, and that too departs into the night.
Okay, so that didn't go the way I think Turenne wanted it to go. And again, like, I feel like he's on the time limit. Like, he really doesn't... he needs to gain a decisive victory. He doesn't have the luxury of waiting around or being too defensive. So yeah, this definitely creates a lot more tension. You get what I mean? And I wonder how he's gonna do it though. I'm assuming he wins since this video is named after him. But I'm interested in seeing how he can, because again, the Austrians, I think, put up a great resistance. They delayed his plans in the forest, and then they held off. So, I think they put up a pretty good resistance there, so I don't know how Turenne's gonna pull off the W.
The French call the Battle of Arnsheim a great victory, but the fact is that Bournonville and the Great Elector can now unite and still stand ready to invade France again when the new campaign season begins in the spring. Thus, Turenne elects to do what no one expects, and many believe to be impossible. At his new headquarters in Dietwiller, he prepares for a winter offensive.
Oh! Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, look at how close Frederick is to uniting with the main army. And he already established that Turenne does not need that. The numerical superiority would be too overwhelming. We've seen winter offensives, and they're usually really bloodbaths. I think I keep bringing up the Napoleon series from Epic History, but we've seen what fighting in the winter can do, like Eylau and stuff. I don't think the conditions are blizzard, but you get what I mean. There's a reason armies always went to winter quarters. So to do this is beyond risky. But again, no one would expect it.
Louis comes royal assent, and from the army of Conde, the king sends 20 infantry battalions and 24 cavalry squadrons to aid in the effort. The man who has virtually invented the role of Minister for War, Francois-Michel Letellier, the Marquis of Louvois, begins the organization of the massive amount of food, fodder and clothes for the men who will fight the winter battles. Turenne.
Okay, that's really cool of Louis and the French to immediately support his plan and then try to help minimize as much suffering as possible. I like to see that. Like, I like how everyone's just in it.
Also receives around 6,000 men under the command of the Marquis of Crequi, but he dismisses them within 7 days, for they are ill-disciplined, old-style units raised by entitled nobles, and the French army is now a place for real fighting men, professional soldiers in all but name.
Dang.
As the snow starts to fall and Turenne waits for Bournonville and the Elector to let down their guards, Louis puts the royal power behind an even greater effort to draw supplies from the nearby provinces to keep the army in the field. Finally, after a month of waiting in freezing conditions, Bournonville and Frederick William take their armies out of the field and into Colmar and Celestat to see out the season. It is the moment Turenne has been waiting for. He makes
Again, this plan is so risky, dude. Because again, when it comes to like these winter battles that we've seen, it's like a three-way battle. It's you, it's the enemy, and it's Mother Nature all fighting. And so far, nature has been undefeated in terms of the lives it's claimed. So again, I admire the ballsiness of this. I think he is definitely bold for doing this. Though I'm wondering if it's going to be at a high cost, you get me?
a show of going into winter quarters himself, placing token garrisons in towns like Saverne, Haguenau, Rambervillers, and Remiremont.
I love this deception. Using your brain, letting the enemy think you're resting too. That's smart.
But instead of staying in camp, he sets out with his strongest men and animals 2 weeks before Christmas. It is a bold move.
Certainly.
To elude spies and scouts, he leads his men through a snowstorm and heads for the Vosges Mountains.
Holy crap.
He breaks the army into smaller detachments to take different routes, and over the next fortnight they battle against the cold to reach Alsace.
Kind of reminds me of Hannibal Barca, and for those of you who don't know, Hannibal Barca is my favorite military commander of all time, so I make this comparison with the utmost of praise. Like his famous crossing of the Alps, especially the winter conditions, like I'm kind of getting shades of that.
Finally, they emerge from the beach and spruce-lined trails, to the shock of the townspeople of Belfort, as they ready themselves for the holy season of Christ's birth. The Imperial Army, led by Bournonville, is spread out across Alsace, thinking they have the region secured. But Turenne catches them off guard.
Holy crap.
On December 29th, he crosses the Ila River and launches a surprise attack near the town of Mulhouse, a strategic spot close to the Rhine River. Bournonville did not expect the French to show up in the middle of winter. The scattered Imperials scrambled, but could not effectively coordinate a defense.
Oh my goodness.
Turenne's winter maneuver was risky, but it paid off.
Amazing. He literally has them, he caught them like, you know, red-handed, or rather as sitting ducks. Risky, but effective.
Led by Montauban, the French cavalry strikes hard and fast, hitting the Imperial left held by Hermann of Baden-Baden. The Imperials had managed to take a defensive position, with their left resting on the forest and their right anchored near the town. But the French frontal assault is a feint. The real pressure is yet to come.
Oh.
Turenne had secretly reinforced his right wing with a large concentration of troops, including elite cavalry and fresh infantry. These reinforcements were concealed during the initial approach and brought up quickly to swing around the Imperial left.
Okay, so they're gonna break through the right and then envelop them like that? It kind of reminds me of like phalanx warfare. Like phalanxes would often do that, like Greek phalanxes, where they would kind of push each other, and then one side, I think it was the Band of Thebes, the Sacred Band, or was it Philip? I forgot, but a strategy that they use is they put all their strongest troops on one side, so they would break through and then like basically have the enemy surrounded. So I'm wondering if like it seems to remind me of that strategy, you know what I mean?
The French right, now heavily bolstered, threatened to outflank the Imperial left.
Stop taking me.
The shock of this sudden mass of fresh French troops caused the collapse of Hermann's left wing. Once the left gave way, the rest of the Imperial line became exposed and started to fall back in disorder.
Oh my.
Hermann attempted to organize a retreat, but the French cavalry, especially those from the reinforced right wing, pressed hard and turned the withdrawal into a rout.
My goodness.
Although not a major pitched battle, Mulhouse was an important, sharp action that gave the French control over Alsace. Turenne's surprise winter campaign had arguably flipped the momentum in France's favor and showed just how brilliant and daring the French commander could be. Turenne orders his 30,000 men to proceed to Colmar. By now, Bournonville and the Great Elector, who had arrived in the wake of Arnsheim, had realized the staggering audacity of their opponent's maneuver, and they rushed to take their unconditioned men from their billets and back into the field.
Wow.
On the 5th of January, on a field near the road between Colmar and Turkheim, a manic and wild-eyed army of Frenchmen comes face to face once more with the bemused and agitated army of the Holy Roman Empire, along with their Brandenburger allies. French scouts reconnoiter the Imperial positions in the dark and see that it stretches almost the entire length between the two towns, with the Imperial right at Turkheim and the left at Colmar. This left flank is protected by the Loch, Thur and Iller rivers, while the right is bordered by the Fech, of which a tributary seems to run entirely in front of the army's forward position. When the weak and late winter sun starts to rise, Turenne can see for himself that the natural boundaries have been augmented by artillery batteries, as well as ramparts and balustrades. Bournonville and Frederick William have done well. Turenne's army is roughly the same strength as that which he commanded at Arnsheim, being in the order of 30,000 men. Bournonville's army is still larger, however, anywhere from a couple of thousand greater than Turenne's roster to 50,000 in total. Again, taking a defensive posture, they await Turenne's opening moves, which come around 11 o'clock. Marching forward from the center with an emphasis on their right wing, the French make for the Colmar positions. This advance is led by the Comte de Loge, who spreads his men out as far as possible, looking for crossing points over the river to the Imperial positions beyond.
I have to say, this battle, once again, in terms of terrain, definitely seems to favor the Imperials, because again, the natural borders, and they're the ones on seemingly going to take the defensive approach that they've augmented through artillery and stuff. So, again, Turenne needs to cross the bridge, and Doesn't seem I don't think he can pull off any fancy maneuvers with the natural barriers. So yeah, this seems like it could be a repeat of the previous battle, where eventually they're just gonna keep fighting until, I don't know. I think the best idea for the Imperials is just to play defense, right? I mean, they seem like they're doing that, but I feel like that's all they can do if they want to achieve some type of success. So yeah, this is a big challenge that Turenne needs to overcome.
The French have some large guns, but most of their heavy ordnance could not be brought through the mountains on the march. Nevertheless, the offensive is sustained to such a degree that Bournonville and Frederick William begin moving troops from the center and the environs of Turckheim to reinforce their left. Once again, this is the action for which Turenne has been waiting.
Oh.
He has secreted himself on his own far left wing, behind a hill in a gorge which led between two spurs of the Vosges Mountains. From there, Turenne leads his concealed force on a wide march around the gorge, emerging at the Fech River on the outskirts of Turckheim.
Oh.
In the meantime, the battle at the center and around Colmar continues with constant exchanges, but the two infantry centers of the armies grapple from a distance. The blizzards of
yeah, this weather I think he's using to great advantage. Yeah, I think that it looks like fog to me, but either way, I think it's supposed to conceal his bigger maneuver in the corner here. So great use of the weather.
Musket balls never extending to a close order clash with bayonets. The Imperials, realizing their mistake in ignoring their right, rush units into Turckheim. 6 guns, 12 battalions and several squadrons of cavalry. But Turenne, despite holding the advantage, decides to pause the assault. The battle settles for a time into a deadlock, with the Turckheim forces awaiting imminent deadly attack, and the main armies in Colmar still battling on in vicious but limited forays. Finally, when it appears that the Imperials will not simply withdraw from the field and spare the necessity of a costly fight, Turenne gives the order to advance at 3 o'clock. His cavalry units, having waited with exceeding discipline under the Imperial guns from Turckheim for what seemed like hours, now surge forward like furies unleashed from Tartarus, crossing the freezing river as though it were not there, and firing pistol and swinging saber at the now confounded and rattled enemy.
Holy crap.
Don't let your vacation...
Okay, that's pretty awesome. That's a pretty awesome move right there.
Everything happens in a rush. The Imperial defenders flee Turckheim, and Turenne is able to bring infantry into the village while his cavalry move forward to secure the outer section. But the Imperials launch a counterattack, brimming out of their still intact center and with the regrouped elements of their right wing. For a moment, all hangs in the balance. The Imperials have the opportunity to catch Turenne's attack force and turn them, upending the result of the day and handing the French general a defeat that will open the doors of France to them.
Holy crap.
They might even come close to capturing or killing Turenne himself, for he is now in the town and caught up in the fighting. His cavalry commander, Foucault, has already been killed.
Oh.
The Imperials get within the town once more, and they can feel the hand of Providence at their back, pushing them forward. But they run into a wall of French muskets, fired with a frequency born of interminable drill and deadly accuracy from the same. The bravest men of the front fall, and then the attack pauses, giving the remaining French cavalry their moment to charge forward.
Oh my gosh. Hitting them from the flank. The oldest trick in the book strikes again.
The The Imperial assault is repulsed, and retreat is the only option.
Wow.
The setting of the sun almost immediately after puts paid to any thoughts of forming another attack. Turenne holds the village, and when the sun rises next morning, he sees that Bournonville and the Great Elector have gone, robbing him of the chance of annihilating their army in its entirety, but leaving thousands of the dead in their wake. Turenne moves on and occupies Colmar, where he finds that the Imperials have left behind 3,000 of the injured in their rush over the Rhine and back to Strasbourg. The Rhineland is French once more, and Turenne, with his veritably insane gamble in crossing mountains during the midst of winter, has saved his nation from certain invasion and ruination. Louis awards him titles and cash rewards, and the Sun King's rule continues in the ascendant over the greatest power in Europe. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Okay. Turenne entered military service at 14 years of age. He joined the Dutch army under his uncle, Maurice, gaining early experience in disciplined infantry tactics. While Versailles was under expansion in 1647, Louis increasingly used it for grand court rituals and political theater, reinforcing his image as the Sun King, even while his kingdom was at war. You can't say the guy didn't have style. The Battle of Turckheim cemented Turenne's reputation as one of the greatest commanders of his age. Napoleon later cited Turenne's campaign as an example of perfect operational art. The war's scale in 1647 put enormous strain on French royal finances, even when Colbert's reforms, funding simultaneous campaigns on multiple fronts, required heavy taxation and borrowing. Okay, so I want to quickly give praise to Turenne. That was great. The dude single-handedly, with a numerically inferior force, saved France, and through bold action, reminding me of Hannibal Barca, a very risky gamble with the winter offensive, but it worked out perfectly. And yeah, that's really cool. Again, like every time we see winter offensives in this channel, they're usually bloodbaths. I keep thinking of like Eylau and stuff. There's a reason armies didn't want to fight in the winter. But Turenne definitely pulled off a great victory there, so it's really cool. And tomorrow we'll look at the second part of Turenne's videos. So yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Another great video.